So I just hit send again, and I just wanted to see if it printed out. Yeah, so you can see I sent a message again and we got one right back. All right, so for this video, I want to look at how to create a WebSocket backend, a serverless setup for your Godot project. It can be used for Godot or Unity or even a web page, but having this serverless WebSocket backend allows you to create all kinds of cool functionalities like a lobby, a matchmaking system, maybe chat, maybe you just want to save some data, or your game is a slower paced game and you can track some movement. If you're curious on finding out some more information about that, I just did a video about 5 backend strategies. I recommend going and taking a look at that first. For now, I just want to be able to have this standalone video where I can show you, okay, this is how you create a WebSocket serverless backend, so that the next one I can just dive right into the functionality and you already have a video reference to go and build your WebSocket server off of. This is a standalone thing that you can add alongside your Godot server or Unity server, wherever it's running. So you'll have your game hosted somewhere and your game client will run and your players will join. And from there, it goes and calls this AWS Lambda backend that we're going to use WebSockets for. And it's going to wait for everybody to join the match, and it's going to return to you the IP and port that you need to join in your game client. So then once that happens, then you can establish a typical Godot client to Godot server backend, and you'll be able to communicate with those RPCs or network variables like you normally would. This is going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be the basis. The idea behind this series right now is I want to create a lobby and matchmaker system. So in this video, we're going to look at just how to create a basic WebSocket server, and then in the next video, how to connect your Godot client to that. And then hopefully in the next one in the series, we'll be able to look at that matchmaking and lobby system. So if you want to see that functionality, let me know. And if you don't, let me say, no, don't show us that, do something else, because we can pivot from there and maybe we can create a chat program or whatever else you're interested in. So let me know in the comments if this is what you want to see, but having this WebSocket serverless function out of the way will be very helpful. It's serverless. So as soon as you connect to it, it just works. And then when you're done, it goes away, it shuts down. It's a very cost-effective, cheap way to get a backend server up and running for all those support functionalities that you have for your game. So let's dive in. So once you're logged into AWS, go over and click on API Gateway. So let's open that up in one tab, get that running. Okay, and then we'll get Lambda opened and we'll go and hit Create API. And look at that, they already have this done for you where it's like a package ready to go WebSocket build. So let's go ahead and build that. So let's just name it API Gateway Demo. And this request body action, this is like an action like, are you connecting, are you disconnecting? So it's more of a higher level request action that's happening. We don't have to worry about this too much, but you can customize this if you need to. Let's say a certain action will route your incoming WebSocket to another Lambda function. This can come in handy, so it can check this field to do that routing and other types of functionalities. And we can just leave it blank for now because the default request body action will work perfectly for this setup. And for the request body action setup, we can just put in exactly that, request. And then we'll hit next. And here we're gonna add a connection route, a disconnection route, and a default route. But before we do that, let's go over to the Lambda console because we need to create a function. So hit create function. We're gonna author from scratch. Let's just say WebSocket Lambda demo. I like using all the modern Node.js technologies. I believe they support a ton of different languages and that sort of thing, but let's just go with the latest and hit create function.
A few moments later.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I always like to log the request when I'm getting started. So let's go ahead and log this. So what this will do is just log the incoming request, and that will be passed in through this event object. So when this Lambda function executes, when it first spins up, like if you make a request to it, whether you're making some kind of API request or you're establishing a WebSocket, it will come into this handler function and everything in the request will come through this event parameter here. So I always like to print it out when starting out development. It just helps with debugging. And then we'll look at where those print out in just a second. So we can just leave everything as is for now. Hit Command S or Control S to save, and then we'll just hit deploy so that we know those things will print out. And let's see, if we go over to API Gateway, we can say add connect route, and it just basically adds the key for what that action is. Remember on the previous screen where that action is? Well, that's going to be connect. and then we'll do the same with disconnect. And then the default route for this example, everything, all the requests that aren't a connect or disconnect, so just sending messages, will get routed to this default key. And again, you can customize this if you'd like, but that's for another video. And what we're gonna do is set up the integration type, and there's a couple different ways you can do it, but because we're using a Lambda backend for this, let's hit Lambda, and we got our region selected. Let's look for the one we just created, which is WebSocket Lambda demo. And we're gonna select it again for the disconnect route, and for the default route, we'll also select that. So again, you can customize this to point your routes to different Lambda functions if you need, but for this original example, I don't think we need to do anything fancy with it. So hit next, and stage name, we'll just leave it production, and everything looks good there. So we'll just create and deploy. So this is spinning up a API gateway that's specific for handling WebSockets. So no matter what your client is, whether you're using Unity or Godot or even a web page, you can connect to this, and it will forward the connection and disconnection and any other messages to that Lambda that we just created. We got the green banner there, so I think we're good there. And let's head on over to our Lambda function. And I think we can actually test at this point. That's how crazy easy this is. So let's go back into the API gateway and hit deploy API. And remember a second ago, we created a production stage. So go ahead and select that, hit deploy, and there's our WebSocket URL. So let's copy that. And I do have a demo project already in Godot with a WebSocket setup. So I'm going to copy in that URL that I just selected, which is just a WSS, which means secure WebSocket. And I'm going to save that. And let's go ahead and hit play. And I believe if we connect, we should see connecting to host, client just connected. Great. So we are connected to that WebSocket. That's how fast this is. If you want to see how painful it was to do this before, go look at one of my older videos I did like 2 or 3 years ago. It is a very long video on how to set up WebSockets, and they made it much easier. So I'm very excited that that's where we're at today. If we go back into this Lambda function and you hit monitor, we can take a look at the logs and see what we printed out. Remember, we printed out that event. So hit view CloudWatch logs, and it should take us right to our Lambda function, and it does. And there's our event, this line right there. And you can see this is a big chunk of data that comes in. And here's that route key, event type, and connect. And you can see connect there. So that matches perfectly with what we expect. And we're able to handle those connect functionalities. Now, if I were to go ahead and kill that Godot server that I have spun up over there, you would see, let's go ahead and just try that. And it should disconnect. And we should get a log in here. I'm just going to refresh the page. And it does get delayed. Okay, there it is. So it is delayed. It's not immediate most of the time. And you can see there's our route key and our disconnect action happening right there. So we know that we're able to connect to a WebSocket and disconnect. So let's move on to sending a message. We need to build out a little bit first. So let's go over to the code. I'm just going to make a really basic boilerplate handling the connection and disconnection actions, and maybe just printing a custom log, and then also sending back a message to the client once the client gives us a message. So just like a quick handshake. Yeah, I got your message. Here's one right back at you. So let's just see how to do that. I like to format with 4 spaces. It makes it much easier to read. So what we did here is we're just checking to make sure we have a request context object and that we do receive an event type. And when we get a connect event type, we'll just print out WebSocket connected. And with a disconnect, we'll also just print out, okay, WebSocket connected. I'm going to try to return a response message, which you can see I created up here upon this connect. So let's try to do that. We'll just say hello. And for disconnect, this may not even work because the socket's been closed, so it might not be able to send that. So we'll see shortly if that's going to work. So for this one, if we receive a message, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to actually print out the message we received from the client. So we'll do event.body, and the body is going to contain the entire request message that we expect to receive. And if you're curious where this request context and event body lies, if you come down in here, you can see here's the logs and the request context object I was just referring to. And then once we actually receive a body message, it will actually show up down here at the bottom after this area here, but we'll see that in just a second. So what we need to do here is just create a quick statement like, hello, we got your message or whatever. So here's a message back at you. But in order to do that, we need to be able to execute on that API connection. So we have to import a AWS library first. So go ahead up at the top and let's see how to do that. So what we've done here is we've imported from the AWS SDK Client API Gateway Management API library a couple different things. This API Gateway Management will allow us to talk back onto the WebSocket, and then we'll also be able to post messages to that connection and also delete the connection. So we're not probably going to use these two, but this one's going to come in handy. And how do I know about these things? Well, if you look into the docs, if you want, I can link those documentations in the comments that shows you all the different APIs for that. But it's really just, I would just Google API Gateway Management, and then you'll see the libraries that you need to access the WebSocket functionality. So down here, we're going to use that. So all we're building here is the endpoint to request back onto that API Gateway WebSocket connection so that we can send data back over the socket. So that's all that's doing there. And here we're just creating the data that we're going to send. So the input data that we're going to send back over the WebSocket connection. So we're going to connect to a specific ID, the ID that the request was sent from. So if you have a Godot client that's connected with a WebSocket, we know that we're going to send that message back on that connection ID. And then here is the data that we're going to send back to it. You can send back JSON data or whatever kind of data, string data that you want to send. I'm just sending the response message, which in this case is, here's a message back at you. And here, of course, we create our command, which is post to connection command, and that will just post a message back on the API Gateway socket. And here we actually execute the API Management Gateway command of send, and of course with the command that we just said. So we're going to post this input data here back over that socket with this command. Now I did use the word await here, which means we're going to have to add an async handler, which we already have set up here. So I guess I accidentally closed off the response part. Let's make sure this formats correctly. Okay, so then the typical response back, we can just leave to this default. Let me put the response message. This isn't really for the WebSocket communication. This is just like a general connection establishment response. Everything that you're going to want to send over the socket will be using these send commands here, not this. This is, so you can probably just ignore this. I actually don't even want to send anything. So I think we've got our basic WebSocket set up to accept, connect, disconnect, and message events. And we're going to return a message of hello and goodbye, and also a response message to any message we receive from the client. Here's a message back at you. So let's see if that works. So we'll go ahead and connect. We just connected, disconnected. So we do have a bug. So let's see what we're getting. Okay, so we're not getting a good connection there. Let's go see what the logs say. So we'll go back over to our CloudWatch tab, and you can see we've got another session here, and let's look at our error type here. Delete connection command not found. That's interesting. I think I spelled command wrong. I don't even think we need to use that. So for this demo, let me just delete it. I was just spelling it wrong. Let's come back over here and refresh this. Let's connect again. Okay, great. So we connected, and let's send a message back and see what happens. So we're sending hello world, and we got an error back. Okay, so let's take a look at what that error is. think I have a pretty good idea. It's a permission issue. As you can see here, we are not authorized to perform any execute API manage connections on this resource, on this Lambda function here, for this API gateway. So we're not allowed to do this from Lambda. So that is going to be one of the many issues that you face when you're working with AWS and Lambda and really any resources, that you always have to provide permissions to use other services. So you can use Lambda in itself, but the second you get outside those bounds, you need to make sure that you're enabling the correct permissions. So if we minimize this for a second and come over to configuration, scroll down a little bit, and underneath this permissions tab over here, you'll already see that we have some Amazon CloudWatch log permissions that they already gave us. So we already have permission to create a log group and put log streams. That's why this CloudWatch log stream is already working, where we can see what's happening and we can just print to it and see exactly what's printed out. So if you're ever not able to see your logs, it's because you don't have permissions. And fortunately, these modern Lambda function setups will allow us to have access to those permissions out of the box. But we also need to add a permission to be able to call the execute API command. So let's see how to do that. So here's the role that it created for us. So I think we can just click on it here and it will open up the policy that we have for this Lambda function. And don't be intimidated by this. This isn't that big of a deal, but for this, let's just come over here to add permission and create an inline policy. So this policy, we want to enable the access to be able to call back on an API gateway from our WebSocket. So if you're curious how I know a lot of this, well, there's documentation for it. There's documentation for everything. Sometimes it's a little difficult to find, but you may have to dig for it, but it's usually pretty clear. So over here, it tells us that you need the execute API action supported by this managed connection. So what we're gonna do is, if we go back over into this policy section, we're gonna search for execute API, perfect. And if you want to know what execute API is, you can actually hover over this and click documentation, and it brings you to what is API gateway. So we know we're in the right place. So I'm going to close that, but feel free to dig into that. And what actions do we need? Well, we need managed connections. That's that API gateway management. So it'll give us access to do that, to post back to that. Down here, we want to specify the resource that it can use. So the resource is going to be actually our API gateway. So before we get into that, go back over to your API gateway and copy this identifier here. So let's copy that, go back to the policy, and I'm going to add an ARN. And what we can build it, we can actually copy the whole ARN. Where is it? So here's the whole ARN. You're not gonna wanna include the connect. Well, like if you wanna, deny permission to connect, you could do that. So you can copy it that way. I like just copying the actual unique ID. So come over to this routes, click on and copy this unique ID for the API gateway, come back over to the policy. So we want to be able to use resources in this account. I'm going to just do this region only, which is US East -1. I don't want it to use any API. I want it to use our specific one, but I don't care about any stage or any method. Or any resource. Now I like to lock things down as tight as possible, but for demos and things like that, you can leave it a little bit looser. But when you're in production, make sure this is locked down. Make sure you're not spreading permissions to other things and adding policies to open up, because that can be a security concern for your game. So we'll hit add ARNs and hopefully that worked. Looks like it's correct here, you can see, and we'll just hit next. And we'll create policy. Oh, I gotta name it. So let's just name it WebSocket demo policy. Make it meaningful so that in the future, if you wanna know what that policy is, it'll be easy to find. So we'll create that policy and we can basically close that, come back over to your Lambda function. And if you go over to the configuration tab, you can see I don't have anything here for that execute API yet, or that API gateway. So if we hit refresh, we should see, yep, see, now we have two things. We have API Gateway and CloudWatch. So you can select between the two, and it's given us that execute API managed connections. And I think we just have to run a quick deploy. So I'm gonna change something really quick, just hit enter and hit deploy. And in theory, this should work. So we should be able to see a response message back from the connection. So let's go and refresh our client. Let's hit connect. You can see down here in logs, we just connected, and we'll hit send, sending hello world. And let's see if we get, here's a message back at you. Perfect. So now we have a connected WebSocket that's actively connected to our Godot game. So this is our little Godot game or client. In this case, it's just a demo, with a couple buttons, but for an actual game, we could actually have a active WebSocket connection over to your Lambda function here, and it's going to be sending you back whatever message you want. So if you had a card game and you were like, play card, it could come in here and see, well, which card was played, and then you can return whatever response message you want. You can track position and location of characters, maybe in a slower paced game. You can send data to be saved to the database somewhere, and I'm going to show you how to do that with our lobby example or our lobby series. You can make requests to other services. Maybe your WebSocket is doing something where it needs to talk to some other service during the game, or maybe you're saving analytics to some other analytics server somewhere. You can do all that from here. So I just hit send again, and I just wanted to see if it printed out. Yeah, so you can see I sent a message again and we got one right back. So that's pretty much it for a very basic WebSocket serverless backend using API Gateway and Lambda under AWS. So the basis of pretty much all these other examples that I'd like to run through, where we create these ancillary functionalities around our game that don't actually need to run in the game. This is how I recommend doing it. You know, I know Unity gaming services and like GameLift will provide you with matchmaking and lobby functionality and chat functionality, and you're going to be working in the game itself though. You're going to be working in your Unity or your Godot build backend server or in client games. So if you don't want to do that, you know, because maybe that cost is a little too high, or you just don't care to use those services, you don't want to manage these heavy services and you want full control of what's happening with your game, definitely you can check this out. And I'm gonna make more complex functionalities as we go. And so if there's something you do want to see, I'm gonna start with the lobby, but if there is something else you want to see, let me know and I can do a demo of that, and hopefully we can see some cool things come to life here. Anyways, so if you enjoyed it, make sure you liked it and make sure you're subscribed, because you're not going to want to miss the rest of the series. Thanks for watching.